Today we are doing inverse functions. Okay? Inverse functions are inverses of each other if f of g of x equals x and g of f of x equals x. So what this means is if you plugged in x for g and you got your answer, and then you plug that answer in for f, you'd end up getting x as the answer. Okay? And then vice versa. This, though, sounds really confusing. We're not really going to work with that too much. Okay? The function, I just noticed this typo. The function g is denoted by, it should actually be g to the negative 1, and read as g inverse. Or you could have had that like as f. So basically, anytime you have an inverse, it's going to have a negative 1 exponent. Okay? So if your original function, f of x, your inverse function will be f to the negative 1 of x. So that's just telling you one is your original equation and one is your inverse. Okay? Same thing. If the original one is y, your inverse will be y to the negative 1. Yes? So far so good? All right. So, in order to find an equation for the inverse relation, this is what you will do. So, step 1 is you're going to exchange x and y in the equation. So, we're going to do example 1 while I'm giving you the steps. So, if I exchange x and y in this equation, my new equation will be the same thing, but instead of writing y, I write x. So it's going to be x equals negative 3y plus 2. So again, all I did is exchange x and y. Step 2 is to solve the new equation for y. So we need to get y by itself. What will I do here in order to get y by itself? What's the first step? Good. Subtract 2 to both sides. So I do that and I have x minus 2 equals negative 3y. Is y by itself? No. What will be my next step? Good. Divide by negative 3 to both sides. So now y is by itself. But I'm not going to write y. What am I going to write? Y to the negative 1 power. So step 3, instead of writing y equals, you will write y to the negative 1 equals, denoting it is an inverse. So my answer will be y to the negative 1 equals x minus 2 all divided by negative 3.
You do that even though like the y is already by itself in the original problem?
The y is by itself, but this isn't my original y equation. So because it's not my original y equation, which is right here, you have to write it to the negative 1 power, stating that it's your inverse.
You have to put y minus 1 equals or else it's wrong?
Yes. Otherwise, if you just had y, then that means it's like your original function, and it's not. These are not the same. Okay? So it's basically showing that it's the inverse.
Hold up. So every time there's y by itself, you do y to the negative 1?
If you exchange it. So this one I'm not going to write as y to the negative 1 because this is my original equation. This is my original function. But when you're solving these, when you exchange them and then resolve for y, you'll always do it to y to the negative 1. All right, example 2. So I'm going to start pulling popsicle sticks. So listen to my questions because I might be calling you. All right, my first step is to do what on example 2? So again, for a popsicle stick, what is my first step? Manpreet. Good. So how will you write that equation? Perfect. All right. My second step, I would say, is to get rid of your fractions. By just raising your hand, who remembers how I could get rid of the fraction in this problem? Who knows what to do? Only one person knows? Okay, a few more know what to do? Okay. All right. Isabella, share with me. What will I do? We can multiply by the reciprocal, but I think easiest would just be to multiply by your common denominator, which would be 3. So I'm going to multiply the entire equation by 3, And I always like to just go ahead and write a 3 next to every term so I don't forget. And when I do that, I get 3x equals, here the 3's cancel, and we get 2y plus, and 3 times 7 is 21. Zane, correct, get on the homework. Okay, so the object is to get y by itself. So for a popsicle stick, who can tell me my next step in order to get y by itself? Yang, what is my next step in order to get y by itself? Very good. We will subtract 21 to both sides. So now, and I'm just going to write it with y on the left side. So we have 2y equals 3x minus 21. No, there's not going to be enough time. Okay. In order to get y by itself, what will I do now? Bryce. Perfect. Divide both sides by 2. And I write my answer. Can someone tell me exactly how I write my answer? Mandel. Perfect. And that is the correct answer. Are there questions? Okay, so all we're doing, the steps are, step 1, what do we do? Everybody tell me.
Exchange x and y.
Good. Step 2?
Solve the new equation for y.
Solve for y. Step 3? Write your answer with to the -1. Exactly. All right, moving to the next one. If you notice on this example 3, f of x can sometimes be confusing. So what I recommend is when you see f of x, just write it as y to kind of help you out, because that makes more sense when you're exchanging x and y. So I'm just going to write f of x as y. So I'm going to write my new equation now. My question for a popsicle stick is, how will I write my new equation? Mitchell. Yes, very good, Mitchell. Thank you. X equals y squared is correct. Now I need to get y by itself. So my next step is to do what in order to get y by itself? Kate. Very good. You square root it. To get y squared to just be a y, we have to square root both sides. So that means I'm going to have y equals the square root of x. Is that the correct answer?
No.
No. How do I write my answer?
-1. And the y. 1.
I'm not going to write y to the -1 though. Because in my original problem I had what? F of x. So how can I write f of x with the -1? How do I write it? F to the -1 of x equals root x. Yes.
I'm not.
You want like, why did you?
Why you put y squared? It's x squared.
Okay, I'm going to start from the beginning. F of x can sometimes be confusing, so f of x and y are basically the same thing. So instead of having f of x, I just wrote y. Next step is to exchange x and y. So wherever you see y, we're writing a x. And with x, I'm writing a y. So that's how I have x equals y squared. We want y by itself. The only way to get y by itself if it's y squared is to take the square root. So the square root of y squared is y, and then the square root of x is just root x. So that's basically your answer, but you have to do your -1 power. Well, then we just go back to our original problem, and since our original problem was dealing with f of x, you want your answer to be in terms of f of x, so we write it as f to the -1 of x. Are we good?
Yeah.
You're welcome. Anybody else have questions before we move on? All right. Example 4. Notice on this one it says that x is less than or equal to 0. What numbers are less than or equal to 0? Negative numbers. So that's going to kind of come into play here, and we'll talk about it later. So on example 4, what do you think we should do first?
Switch the f of x out to y.
Good. I'm going to write f of x as y, just because it will help me exchange x and y a little easier. For a popsicle stick, can someone tell me what my new equation is going to be in order to find the inverse? Michelle. So all we're doing is exchanging x and y. X equals. Perfect. Good job. Thank you, Michelle. Okay, so all I did there is exchange x and y. Next step is to get y by itself. What will I need to do first in order to get x by itself? Lena, what will I do first? We want y by itself. What's in front of the y? Exactly. Divide by -10 to both sides. Thank you. Good job. So now I'm just going to write this as I have y to the 6th equals x over -10. So again, I want y by itself, but I have y to the 6th power. So how am I going to get y to the 6th power to just be y? So again, what am I going to do in order to get y just by itself? Tiffany. Where's Tiffany? There we are. So we know if you go backwards, how we had y squared. In order to get it just y, we took the square root. So if we have 6, we need to take the 6th root is correct. Good job. So we're going to take the 6th root of both sides. So when you take the 6th root of y to the 6th power, we just get y equals, and then we're just going to leave these in root form like this. So the 6th root of of x over -10. But this is not how I write my answer. Can somebody tell me how to write my answer correctly? Jarrett, how do I write my answer correctly? Are you paying attention at all? Can we please? Okay, you're going to help me through this one. So my original problem is f of x. So whenever you're doing inverse, if you go back to the beginning of our notes, if I have f of x originally, my inverse will be written as f to the -1 of x. So that means on this problem, I'm going to write it as f to the -1 of x equals, and then we have our answer, which is the 6th root of x over -10. Now, real quick, I want to talk to you about how this says x is less than or equal to 0. You know how with even roots, we can't have negatives under them because we're only working with real numbers right now? Well, if x is negative, and you put a negative in here, a negative divided by a negative ends up making it a positive. So that's why you're telling this, that this is actually going to work out. If they hadn't have told us this and there was a negative under the root, then it would probably end up being no solution because you get a negative under the root. All right? So that's our answer. Let's go ahead and finish example 5 here. Normally I'd have you do this on your own, but because of the time, I'm going to go through this. So first step is to do what? Anybody tell me? Good. Change f of x to y. Next step is to do what? Good. Switch x and y. So my equation is going to be good. X equals -2 over 3, and then we have y cubed. Now, in order to get rid of my fractions, I'm going to multiply everything by 3. So I multiply each of my terms by 3, and I end up getting 3x equals -2y cubed. Next, I divide by -2 to both sides. So I have y cubed equals 3x over -2. In order to get rid of the y cubed, I will take the cubed root. So I have y equals the cubed root of 3x over -2. It is okay to have a negative under an odd root. And the last thing you need to do is write this as f to the -1 of x equals the cubed root of 3x over negative 2.